When I got back from the hospital, my daughter said, "Mom, these are the lawyers who'll transfer your inheritance to me, now that your time is almost up." I just smiled and made one phone call that made sure she never disrespected me like that again. But let me start from the beginning, because you need to understand how I got to that moment. My name is Margaret, and I'm 68 years old. 3 days ago, I walked out of St. Mary's Hospital with test results that changed everything. The doctor's words were still echoing in my head as I drove home. "The tumor is aggressive, Margaret. We're looking at maybe 18 months, 2 years, if we're optimistic with treatment." I had gone to the appointment alone, just like I'd done everything else for the past 26 years. My daughter Jessica was busy with her medical practice. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. My friends were either dead or too sick to be bothered, and asking anyone for help had never been my way. I learned early that if you want something done right, you do it yourself. The drive home felt longer than usual. I kept thinking about Jessica, my only child, the one person I thought would care about this diagnosis. She was a successful cardiologist now, living in that massive house across town with her husband David. I was proud of her, despite everything. I had raised her to be independent, strong, capable of taking care of herself, maybe too independent. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar black sedan parked outside my house. Through my living room window, I could see figures moving around. My heart skipped, not from the tumor, but from a mother's instinct that something was terribly wrong. I walked through my front door to find Jessica sitting at my kitchen table with 2 men in expensive suits. Papers were spread across the surface, and my daughter looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't concern for her mother who'd just returned from the hospital. It wasn't love or worry. It was impatience, like I had interrupted an important business meeting. "Mom," Jessica said, not even standing up to greet me. "Perfect timing. These are Mr. Harrison and Mr. Webb from Morrison and Associates. They're here to help us transfer your assets into my name given your situation." I stood there holding my purse, still wearing the same clothes I'd worn to hear my death sentence, and stared at my daughter. "My situation?" David, her husband, cleared his throat from where he was leaning against my kitchen counter. "Jessica told them about your diagnosis, Margaret. We thought it would be better to handle the paperwork now, while you're still coherent. Still coherent. As if having cancer had suddenly made me mentally incompetent. One of the lawyers, the older one with gray hair, smiled at me with the kind of practiced sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Mrs. Henderson, we understand this is a difficult time. We're here to make the transition as smooth as possible for your family." I looked at Jessica, searching her face for some sign of the little girl I had raised. The child I had worked 2 jobs to support after her father died of a heart attack when she was only 16. The teenager I had driven to every tennis lesson, every academic competition, every college interview. The young woman whose medical school tuition I had paid by selling the house my late husband and I had built together. "How did you know about my diagnosis?" I asked slowly. Jessica shifted in her chair, not meeting my eyes. "Dr. Martinez called me. Professional courtesy." Dr. Martinez was my oncologist, and Jessica had been the one to recommend him. I had specifically asked that my medical information remain private, but apparently that meant nothing when it came to my daughter's convenience. "And you thought the first thing to do was call lawyers?" David stepped forward, and I could see the irritation in his eyes. He had never liked me, that much was clear. To him, I was just an obstacle, an old woman who took up too much of his wife's time and attention. "Margaret, let's be practical here. You're going to need care, possibly hospice eventually. These arrangements take time, and Jessica can't be dealing with legal complications while she's trying to help you." Help me? When was the last time Jessica had helped me with anything? When was the last time she had even called, except to cancel plans or ask me to babysit their golden retriever when they went on vacation? I set my purse down on the counter and looked at the papers scattered across my table. Property transfer documents, power of attorney forms, bank account authorizations. They had come prepared for everything. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Jessica finally looked up at me, and for a split second I saw something that might have been guilt flash across her face. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Mom, don't be dramatic. We're trying to help you." That word again. Help. I almost laughed. but the sound that came out was more like a sob. 26 years of raising her alone, 26 years of putting her needs before mine, 26 years of believing that blood meant something, that family meant something, and this was my reward. I thought about the life insurance policy worth $300,000, the house that was finally paid off after all these years, the savings account I had been building, thinking I might leave Jessica something meaningful when I died, money I had saved by eating store-brand food, by driving the same car for 15 years, by never taking vacations or buying myself anything nice. I need some time to think about this, I said finally. David's jaw tightened. Time is exactly what we don't have, Margaret. These processes can take months. My mother just got devastating news, Jessica said, but her tone was flat, rehearsed. Of course she needs time to process. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. When had she become this person? When had she learned to speak about me like I was already dead, already irrelevant? When had I become nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed? The lawyers began packing up their papers, promising to call tomorrow. David followed them to the door, shaking hands and talking in low voices about timelines and procedures. Jessica remained at my table, finally alone with her mother for the first time in months. I know this seems sudden, she said, her voice softer now that the men had left. But I'm trying to protect you, Mom. I'm trying to make sure you're taken care of. I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe that somewhere inside this stranger was the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to tell me I was the best mom in the world. But the way she avoided my eyes, the way her fingers drummed nervously on the table, told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about protecting me. This was about protecting themselves. As I watched my daughter leave, promising to call tomorrow to discuss the details, I made a decision. If Jessica thought she could push around a dying old woman, she was about to learn that her mother still had some fight left in her. I reached for my phone. I had a call to make. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room, surrounded by 26 years of memories, wondering where I'd gone wrong. The house felt different now, like a museum of a life that someone else was already planning to dismantle. I walked to Jessica's old bedroom, which I had kept exactly the same since she moved out. Her high school trophies still lined the shelves. Her medical school acceptance letter was still framed on the wall. Photos of us together covered her dresser. But looking at them now, I realized something heartbreaking. In every single picture, I was looking at her with pure love, while she was looking at the camera. I pulled out a shoebox from under her bed, filled with report cards and school projects I had saved. There was the Mother's Day card she made in 3rd grade. My mom is the best because she works hard to take care of me. The essay she wrote in high school about how I was her hero for raising her alone. The thank you note she wrote when I sold my wedding ring to pay for her MCAT prep course. When had those words become meaningless? When had I stopped being her hero and become her burden? The phone call I made that night wasn't to a lawyer or a financial advisor. It was to my sister Ruth, the only family I had left besides Jessica. Ruth lived in Phoenix now, and we only talked on holidays. But she was the one person who remembered what I had sacrificed for my daughter. Margaret, it's past midnight your time. What's wrong? I told her everything. The diagnosis, the lawyers, the way Jessica had looked at me like I was already dead. Ruth listened without interruption, the way she always had when we were children. I'm not surprised, she said finally. That girl has been taking you for granted for years. She's my daughter, Ruth, and you're her mother. But when was the last time she acted like it? I thought about that question long after we hung up. When was the last time Jessica had asked about my life, my health, my happiness? When was the last time she had called just to talk? Not because she needed something? I couldn't remember. The next morning, David called before Jessica did. That should have been my first warning sign. Margaret, I hope you've had time to think about our conversation yesterday. I have, I said carefully. Good. Jessica and I have been discussing your situation, and we think it would be best if you moved in with us. At least temporarily, while you're going through treatment, my situation. There was that phrase again, like my cancer was a scheduling conflict they needed to manage. That's very generous, David, but I'm comfortable in my own home. His voice hardened slightly. Margaret, let's be realistic. You're going to need help. Jessica can't be driving across town every time you have an emergency. Emergency. I had lived alone for 12 years since retiring, and I had never once called Jessica for an emergency. I had fallen down my front steps 2 winters ago and drove myself to urgent care with a sprained ankle. I had food poisoning last spring and managed fine on my own. I had been handling my own emergencies my entire adult life. What does Jessica think about this plan? There was a pause. Jessica wants what's best for you. Of course, we both do. But Jessica hadn't called me herself. She had sent her husband to handle the difficult conversation, just like she had sent lawyers to handle yesterday's ambush. I'll think about it, I said, and hung up before he could respond. An hour later, Jessica finally called. Her voice was strained, tired, like this whole situation was wearing her out. Mom, David says you're being difficult about the living arrangements. Difficult. Another word that cut deep. I had never been difficult when I was working 16-hour days to keep food on our table. I hadn't been difficult when I gave up my own dreams of going back to school so I could pay for hers. I wasn't difficult when I spent my life savings on her wedding, her house down payment, her student loans. I just think I should have some say in my own life, Jessica. She sighed, and I could picture her rubbing her temples the way she did when she was frustrated. Mom, you're not thinking clearly right now. The diagnosis, the shock of everything. It's normal to resist change, but you need to trust me. I'm a doctor. I know what's best for your care. What's best for my care, not what's best for me. Not what would make me happy or comfortable. What's best for managing the inconvenience of my illness. When did you start planning this, Jessica? What do you mean? The lawyers, the papers, the living arrangements? When did you and David decide my life for me? Another pause, longer this time. We've been concerned about you for a while, Mom. You're getting older, you live alone, and now with the cancer. Concerned about me? Or concerned about my assets? The silence on the other end was deafening. I had asked the question that neither of us wanted to face, but it hung there between us like a truth too ugly to ignore. Mom, that's not fair. Isn't it? You haven't visited me in 3 months, Jessica. You haven't called except to cancel plans or ask favors. But the day I get a cancer diagnosis, suddenly you're concerned enough to have lawyers ready? I've been busy with work. You've been busy with work for 10 years. It was true, and we both knew it. Ever since Jessica finished her residency and married David, our relationship had become a series of postponed lunches and forgotten phone calls. I had told myself she was building her career, establishing her marriage, living her life. I had convinced myself that this was normal, that adult children were supposed to drift away from their parents. But sitting in that kitchen where I had helped her with homework every night for 12 years, I realized that distance wasn't normal. Indifference wasn't normal. This cold, calculating approach to my illness wasn't normal. Mom, I think you need to understand something. David and I have been talking, and we think you might benefit from counseling. The diagnosis has clearly affected your judgment, my judgment. Now, I was not only physically sick, but mentally compromised. It was like watching someone systematically dismantle my dignity, piece by piece. There's nothing wrong with my judgment, Jessica. Then why are you fighting us on something that's clearly in your best interest? Because it wasn't in my best interest. It was in theirs. Moving me into their house meant control over my daily life, my medical decisions, my finances. It meant David could monitor every doctor's appointment, every financial transaction, every decision I made about my own care. I thought about the life insurance policy again. The house, the savings account, all of it would go to Jessica when I died, just like I had always planned. But now I wondered, would she even wait for me to die before taking it? I need more time to think, I said. Mom, we don't have time. The cancer is in my body, Jessica, not my brain. I can still make my own decisions. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was cold, professional, like she was talking to a difficult patient instead of her mother. Fine, but don't take too long. David says the legal processes are time-sensitive. After she hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and cried. Not for the cancer, not for the death sentence I was facing, but for the daughter I had lost somewhere along the way. The little girl who used to hold my hand was gone, replaced by a stranger who saw me as nothing more than an asset to be managed. But as I wiped my tears, I made a decision. If Jessica and David thought they could manipulate a sick old woman, they were about to learn that I hadn't survived 68 years by being anyone's fool. I reached for my phone again. This time I was calling someone who could help me fight back. The person I called wasn't a lawyer. It was Patricia Mills, my next-door neighbor for the past 8 years. Patricia was 72, sharp as a tack, and had the kind of blunt honesty that came from surviving 3 marriages and raising 5 children on her own. She also happened to be a retired private investigator. Margaret, honey, I've been watching those fancy cars in your driveway, she said when I explained the situation. Something didn't smell right about the whole thing. Within 2 days, Patricia had information that made my blood run cold. David wasn't just an ambitious lawyer with expensive tastes. He was a gambling addict with debts that would make your head spin. She showed me printouts of his credit report, photos of him at the Riverboat Casino, records of cash advances against multiple credit cards. Your son-in-law owes over $200,000, Patricia said, spreading the papers across my kitchen table. And that's just what I could find easily. There's probably more. I stared at the documents, feeling sick. Does Jessica know? Honey, I've seen this pattern before. Men like David are masters at hiding their problems from their wives. They make just enough payments to keep the house of cards standing, but eventually, it all comes crashing down. That evening, I decided to pay Jessica and David an unexpected visit. I rarely went to their house anymore because David always made me feel unwelcome. But I needed to see my daughter with my own eyes, to understand how much she knew about her husband's lies. Their house was everything mine wasn't. Modern, expensive, perfectly decorated. David answered the door in a golf shirt and khakis, looking annoyed that I hadn't called first. Margaret, what brings you by? I wanted to talk to Jessica about the living arrangements. He hesitated, clearly not wanting to let me in. She's in the kitchen. We were just having dinner. I found Jessica sitting at their granite countertop, picking at a salad and scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment I saw my little girl again. She looked tired, stressed, older than her 42 years. Mom, what's wrong? I've been thinking about what you said, about moving in here. David perked up from behind me. That's wonderful news, Margaret. We can start making arrangements tomorrow. I watched Jessica's face carefully. Instead of looking happy or relieved, she looked trapped. Her eyes darted to David, then back to me, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Fear. Are you sure, Mom? I mean, we want you here, of course, but maybe you should take more time to think about it. David's hand landed on Jessica's shoulder, and I saw her flinch slightly. Jessica's just worried about disrupting your routine, Margaret. But we both agree it's the best option. The way he spoke for her, the way she automatically deferred to his opinion, the way her whole body language changed when he was in the room. Suddenly, everything became clear. Jessica wasn't the villain in this story. She was another victim. I spent the next hour making small talk, watching the dynamics between my daughter and her husband. David dominated every conversation, corrected Jessica when she misspoke, made decisions for both of them without consulting her. When Jessica mentioned that she was tired from a long day at the hospital, David suggested she was being dramatic. When she said she might want to take a vacation, he reminded her about their financial goals. As I was leaving, Jessica walked me to my car. For the first time in years, we were alone together without David hovering nearby. Mom, are you really okay with this? Okay? Moving in with us? I studied her face in the porch light. She looked younger somehow. More vulnerable. Are you okay with it, sweetheart? She glanced back at the house, where David was visible through the window, watching us. I just want what's best for you. What about what's best for you? The question seemed to catch her off guard. When was the last time anyone had asked Jessica what she wanted? When was the last time her own happiness had been considered in any decision? I'm fine, Mom. David takes good care of me. But the way she said it, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me, told me everything I needed to know. That night, I called Patricia again. I need you to dig deeper into David's background, not just the gambling. Everything. What are you thinking, honey? I'm thinking my daughter is married to a man who sees women as resources to be exploited, and I'm thinking I might not be his first target. Patricia called me back the next morning with information that made my hands shake. David had been married before, to a woman named Carol Martinez. Carol's elderly mother had died in a suspicious car accident just weeks before Carol filed for divorce, citing financial abuse. The mother's will had been changed shortly before her death, leaving everything to David instead of her daughter. Carol's mother had been in perfect health, Patricia explained. No history of seizures or medical episodes that would explain losing control of her car. The police investigated, but couldn't prove anything. What happened to Carol? She got nothing in the divorce. David had hidden all the assets, claimed the old lady's money was a gift to him personally. Carol ended up having to declare bankruptcy. I felt physically ill. David wasn't just a gambling addict. He was a predator who targeted vulnerable women and their families. And now he had his sights set on Jessica and me. There's more, Patricia continued. I found records of David consulting with elder law attorneys 6 months ago. He was asking about conservatorships, power of attorney laws, what constitutes mental incompetence in elderly patients, 6 months ago, long before my cancer diagnosis. David had been planning to take control of my assets since before I was even sick. He had been studying the legal system, learning how to manipulate it, preparing for the moment when he could strike. I thought about Jessica at the hospital where she worked, saving lives and healing people, while her husband plotted to steal from her dying mother. I thought about how isolated she had become, how she rarely saw friends anymore, how every decision in her life seemed to go through David first. Patricia, I need one more favor. Name it. I need you to help me save my daughter. The plan we came up with wasn't complicated, but it required perfect timing. First, I needed to make David believe he was winning. I called Jessica that afternoon and told her I had decided to move in with them. I could hear the relief in her voice, but also something else. Resignation, like she was accepting a fate she didn't want. That's wonderful, Mom. David will be so pleased. David was more than pleased. He was practically giddy when he called an hour later to help me plan the transition. We scheduled movers for the following week. He offered to help me organize my finances, to make sure all my accounts were properly managed during my illness. He suggested I might want to consider signing power of attorney documents right away, just to make things easier. Everything was moving exactly as he had planned. What he didn't know was that I was planning too. That evening, I sat in my living room and looked around at the life I was about to leave behind. Not because I wanted to, but because sometimes you have to lose a battle to win a war. I was going to let David think he had defeated me, right up until the moment I destroyed him. But first, I had to make sure Jessica was ready to see the truth about the man she married, and that was going to be the hardest part of all. Moving into Jessica and David's house was like stepping into a beautiful prison. They gave me the guest room on the first floor, complete with an adjoining bathroom and a view of their perfectly manicured backyard. David made a big show of helping me settle in, carrying my suitcases and talking about how wonderful it would be to have me close by during my treatment. But within the first week, I understood exactly what this arrangement really meant. David controlled everything: the thermostat, the television channels, the meal schedule, even when I could use the washing machine. He framed it all as concern for my comfort and health, but Jessica and I both knew it was about control. "Mom, you should rest more," Jessica would say when I tried to help with dishes or cooking. But I could see in her eyes that she was really saying, "David doesn't want you in the kitchen when he's talking business on the phone." "Margaret, let me handle your medications," David would insist, taking the bottles from my hands. "We want to make sure you don't accidentally double dose." But what he really meant was, "I want to know exactly what you're taking and when." The worst part was watching what this was doing to Jessica. She had started walking on eggshells in her own home, second-guessing every word, every decision. When David was around, she barely spoke unless spoken to. When he left for work, she seemed to physically exhale, like she could finally breathe again. I had been there 2 weeks when Patricia called with the information I had been waiting for. She used a code we had arranged. If she called and asked about my book club, it meant she had found something important. "Margaret, honey, how's your book club going?" "It's going well, Patricia. What are we reading this week?" "A very interesting story about financial records and phone calls. You might want to check your email tonight when you have some privacy." That evening, while David was in his study and Jessica was on call at the hospital, I opened my laptop in my bedroom. Patricia had sent me a folder of documents that made my blood boil. Bank statements showing David had been forging Jessica's signature on loan applications. Phone records proving he had been lying about his whereabouts during his gambling binges. Credit card statements with charges at casinos on days when he told Jessica he was meeting clients. But the most damning evidence was a series of emails between David and his bookie. Not only did he owe far more money than Patricia had initially discovered, but he had been using Jessica's medical license number to guarantee some of his debts. If he defaulted, they could go after her professional certification, her ability to practice medicine, her entire career. My daughter had no idea that her husband had put everything she had worked for at risk. I printed everything and hid the papers in my medication bag. Then I sat on my bed and planned my next move. I needed Jessica to see these documents, but I also needed to do it in a way that wouldn't put her in immediate danger. David's behavior had become increasingly possessive and controlling since I moved in. I had seen him lose his temper with Jessica over small things: a dinner that was 5 minutes late, a phone call that lasted too long, a smile she gave to the mailman. The opportunity came 3 days later, when David announced he was going out of town for a client meeting. I knew from Patricia's surveillance that he was actually going to Atlantic City for the weekend. This would be my first real chance to talk to Jessica alone since moving in. Friday evening, after David left, I found Jessica in the kitchen staring at an unpaid bill notice that had come in the mail. She looked exhausted, confused, like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Sweetheart, can we talk?" She looked up, startled. "Of course, Mom. Is everything okay? Are you feeling all right?" It broke my heart that her first concern was always my physical health, never her own well-being. "I'm fine, but I'm worried about you." "Me? Mom, I'm not the one who's sick. I sat down across from her at the kitchen table, the same way we used to sit when she was a child and had problems at school. Jessica, when was the last time you were happy? The question seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She blinked, opened her mouth, then closed it again. What do you mean? I mean really happy. When was the last time you smiled because you wanted to, not because someone expected you to? When was the last time you made a decision just because it's what you wanted? Tears started forming in her eyes. Mom, I don't understand what you're asking. When was the last time you went out with friends? When was the last time you bought something for yourself without asking permission? When was the last time you had a conversation without worrying about saying the wrong thing? The tears were flowing freely now. Jessica covered her face with her hands, and I could see years of suppressed emotion finally breaking through. I don't know, she whispered. I can't remember. I reached across the table and took her hands. They were shaking. Baby, I need to show you something, but I need you to promise me you'll stay calm and listen to everything I have to say. She nodded, wiping her eyes with a napkin. I went to my room and returned with the folder of documents. I hired someone to investigate David's finances. Mom, why would you? Because I was worried about you. And because something didn't feel right about how eager he was to get control of my money, I spread the papers across the table, watching Jessica's face as she processed what she was seeing. The forged signatures, the hidden debts, the gambling receipts, the threats from creditors, the emails discussing her medical license as collateral. With each document, I watched my daughter's world crumble. The color drained from her face. Her hands started shaking harder. She kept looking at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. This can't be real, she whispered. David wouldn't. He loves me. Sweetheart, love doesn't put your career at risk without your knowledge. Love doesn't forge your signature on legal documents. Love doesn't lie to you every single day. She stared at a bank statement showing a loan for $50,000 taken out in her name. I never signed this. I never even saw this. I know. He told me we were financially stable. He said we were saving for retirement. He was saving for his next bet. Jessica looked up at me with the most heartbroken expression I had ever seen. Mom, what am I going to do? How could I have been so stupid? You're not stupid, baby. You're trusting. There's a difference. But how did I not see this? How did I not know? I thought about all the ways David had isolated her, controlled her, made her doubt her own instincts. Because he's very good at manipulation. And because you're a good person who assumes other people are good too. We sat in silence for a long time, Jessica staring at the evidence of her husband's betrayal. Finally, she looked up at me with something I hadn't seen in her eyes for years. Determination. What do we do now? Now we make sure he can never hurt you again. But even as I said it, I heard David's car in the driveway. He was home early, and we still had all the incriminating documents spread across the kitchen table. Jessica's eyes went wide with panic. Quick, I whispered, gathering the papers. Act like nothing happened. David walked through the door just as I was sliding the last document into my folder. He looked at Jessica's tear-stained face, then at me, and I could see suspicion forming in his eyes. What's going on here? He asked, his voice deceptively casual. Jessica opened her mouth, but no words came out. I could see her falling back into that familiar pattern of fear and submission. That's when I knew that showing her the truth wasn't enough. David's control over her was too strong, too deeply ingrained. If we were going to save Jessica and stop David from stealing my assets, I was going to have to force his hand in a way that left him no choice but to reveal his true nature. And I was going to have to do it soon before he realized how much we had discovered. Just discussing Margaret's medical appointments, I said smoothly, meeting David's suspicious gaze. Jessica was helping me organize my treatment schedule. David's eyes narrowed as he looked between us. Jessica was still pale, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her water glass. I could see him calculating, trying to determine if we were telling the truth. Right, he said slowly. Well, I'm glad you're both being so organized about things. The way he said organized made my skin crawl, like we were two children who needed supervision to handle adult responsibilities. Over the next few days, I watched David's behavior more carefully than ever. He was suspicious, but not yet alarmed. He started checking on me more frequently, asking about my medical appointments, my phone calls, even commenting on how long I spent in my room. Jessica noticed too. I could see her watching him with new eyes, finally recognizing the controlling behaviors she had been blind to for so long. But David was smart. He had spent years perfecting his manipulation, and he wasn't going to slip up easily. I needed to create a situation where he would reveal his true nature in a way that Jessica couldn't ignore or rationalize away. The opportunity came when my oncologist's office called to schedule my next round of tests. David insisted on taking the call, speaking to the nurse like he was my medical proxy. I watched Jessica's face as he made decisions about my care without consulting me, and I could see recognition dawning in her eyes. "David," she said quietly after he hung up, "shouldn't Mom be the one making those decisions?" His response was swift and calculated. "Jessica, your mother is clearly overwhelmed by all of this. She needs us to help her think clearly." There it was, the subtle implication that I was mentally incompetent, that I couldn't be trusted to manage my own life. It was exactly the kind of groundwork he needed to lay for a conservatorship claim. That night, I called Patricia from my bedroom and told her it was time to execute our plan. "Are you sure about this, honey? Once we start this ball rolling, there's no going back." "I'm sure. Jessica deserves to know what kind of man she married, and I'll be damned if I let him steal everything I've worked for." The plan was simple, but required perfect timing. Patricia had been monitoring David's gambling activities, and we knew he had a big poker game scheduled for the following Friday night. He had told Jessica he was attending a legal conference, but we knew better. While David was out losing money he didn't have, Patricia and I would stage a scene that would force him to show his true colors when he returned home. Friday evening arrived and David left for his conference with a briefcase full of legal documents that I knew were actually betting sheets and IOUs. Jessica was working late at the hospital, which gave Patricia and me time to set everything up. Patricia arrived at 9 o'clock with a folder of additional documents her investigation had uncovered. These were even more damaging than the first batch. Evidence that David had been researching my medical condition online, looking for information about how cancer affects cognitive function. He had been building a case for my mental incompetence before I was even diagnosed. "The bastard has been planning this for months," Patricia said, spreading the papers across the coffee table. "Look at the search history. Early signs of dementia in cancer patients. Legal grounds for conservatorship. Power of attorney for incompetent adults." I felt sick reading the evidence of David's calculated cruelty. He had been waiting for me to get sick so he could swoop in and take control of my assets. When cancer provided the perfect opportunity, he was ready with lawyers and legal documents. "There's more," Patricia continued. "I found records of him consulting with a geriatric psychiatrist about getting you declared mentally unfit. He never scheduled an appointment, but he was gathering information about the process." At 10:30, Jessica came home from the hospital to find Patricia and me sitting in the living room with all the evidence spread out before us. Her face went white when she saw the additional documents. "Oh my God," she whispered, picking up a printout of David's internet searches. "He was planning this even before you got sick. Read this one," I said, handing her a particularly damning email David had sent to his gambling buddy. In it, he bragged about having found the perfect mark, an elderly woman with assets and a naive daughter who would never suspect what he was doing. Jessica sank into a chair, staring at the email. "He called you a mark. He called me naive, because that's what we were to him," I said gently. "You were never his wife, sweetheart. You were his access to respectability and financial security." We heard David's car in the driveway at 11:15. Patricia quickly gathered most of the documents, but we left a few strategically placed on the coffee table, just enough to make it obvious we had been discussing something important, but not enough to reveal the full scope of what we knew. David walked in looking disheveled and angry. I could tell from his expression that the poker game hadn't gone well. When he saw Patricia sitting in his living room, his mood darkened further. "What's she doing here?" he asked, not even bothering to hide his hostility. "Patricia brought over some information about support groups for cancer patients," Jessica said, her voice steadier than I had heard it in weeks. David's eyes swept over the papers on the coffee table. I could see him trying to read them from across the room, trying to determine if they were a threat. "It's pretty late for a social visit," he said to Patricia, his tone barely civil. Patricia smiled sweetly. "Oh, I don't mind staying up late when it's important. Margaret and Jessica have been so worried about the financial impact of the medical bills. I was just sharing some resources about assistance programs." The word financial made David's jaw tighten. "I think we have that under control. Do you?" Patricia asked innocently, "because from what I understand, medical expenses can be overwhelming, especially when there are other financial pressures involved." It was a subtle jab, but David caught it. His eyes narrowed as he looked at Patricia with newfound suspicion. "I think it's time for you to leave," he said bluntly. Patricia stood up, gathering her purse. "Of course. Margaret, Jessica, you both have my number if you need anything. Anything at all." After Patricia left, David immediately turned to Jessica. "What was that really about?" "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb with me. Jessica, that woman doesn't give a damn about cancer support groups. What was she really doing here?" I watched my daughter struggle with the question. The old Jessica would have immediately apologized and explained everything to appease David's anger. But the new Jessica, the one who had seen the evidence of his betrayal, simply said, "She's a friend helping my mother. That's all you need to know." David's mask slipped completely. The charming, concerned husband disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "That's all I need to know?" he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "About what's happening in my own house? With my own wife?" "Your wife can have friends over without your permission," Jessica said, her voice getting stronger. "Not when those friends are filling your head with ideas about finances that don't concern them." "My mother's finances don't concern you either, David." The room went dead silent. I could see David processing what Jessica had just said, realizing that something fundamental had shifted in the power dynamic of their relationship. "Excuse me?" he said. Jessica stood up, and for the first time since I had moved in, she looked him directly in the eye. "I said my mother's finances don't concern you. She's perfectly capable of making her own decisions about her medical care and her money." David's face turned red. "Your mother is dying, Jessica. She's not thinking clearly. Someone needs to protect her from making decisions she'll regret. The only person she needs protection from is you." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. David stared at Jessica with an expression of pure rage, and I realized that we had pushed him exactly where we needed him to be, past the point of maintaining his facade. "What did you just say to me?" he asked, his voice low and threatening, and that's when I knew our trap had worked perfectly. David was about to show Jessica exactly who he really was. What happened next unfolded exactly as I had hoped, though it was still painful to watch. David's mask didn't just slip, it shattered completely. "You ungrateful bitch," he snarled at Jessica, his voice filled with a venom I had never heard before. "After everything I've done for you, everything I've given you, this is how you repay me?" Jessica stepped back, shock written across her face. In 10 years of marriage, David had never spoken to her like this. His control had always been subtle, wrapped in concern and false affection. "David, please calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down," he shouted, stepping toward her. "I've spent years building a life for us, making sacrifices, and now you want to throw it all away because some nosy old neighbor filled your head with lies?" I stayed silent, letting him reveal himself completely. Every word he spoke was proving everything Patricia and I had uncovered. "What sacrifices?" Jessica asked, her voice shaking but defiant. "What exactly have you sacrificed for me?" David laughed bitterly. "You think your little doctor salary pays for this house? For your car? For the lifestyle you've gotten so comfortable with? I thought we built this together." "We built nothing together. I built this. Me? While you were playing with sick people at the hospital, I was making the real money. I was taking the risks." "What risks?" And there it was, the opening I had been waiting for. "Investments, Jessica. High-stakes investments that your simple little mind couldn't understand. But now that we're finally positioned to cash in, you want to throw it all away to protect Mommy's feelings." Jessica looked at him like she was seeing a stranger. "What investments, David? Show me the paperwork." David's eyes flickered with panic, and I knew he was realizing he had said too much. "You don't need to worry about the details. Show me the paperwork," Jessica repeated, her voice stronger now. "I don't have to show you anything. I'm the one who handles our finances." "Our finances," Jessica said slowly, "using my name, using my credit, using my medical license as collateral." David went completely still. "What did you say?" I decided it was time to speak up. "She said you used her medical license as collateral for your gambling debts." "David, did you really think we wouldn't find out?" His head whipped toward me, and I saw pure hatred in his eyes. "You meddling old witch. This is all your fault." "No," Jessica said firmly. "This is your fault. All of it." David spun back to face her. "You don't understand what you're doing. Jessica, if you fight me on this, you'll lose everything. The house, your practice, your reputation. I'll make sure you have nothing." "I already have nothing," Jessica said quietly. "I've been living with nothing for years. No happiness, no freedom, no respect. At least now I know why. I watched my daughter find her strength, and I felt prouder of her than I had ever felt in my life." David made one last desperate attempt at control. "Jessica, baby, listen to me. Your mother is sick. She's not thinking clearly. These people are manipulating her, trying to turn her against family. Don't let them destroy what we've built." But Jessica was done being manipulated. "What we've built is a lie, David. Our marriage is a lie. You never loved me. You loved what you could take from me." David's face contorted with rage. For a moment, I thought he might become violent, but then something else took over. Calculation. He looked between Jessica and me, and I could see him already planning his next move. "Fine," he said coldly. "Have it your way. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've thrown away." He turned and walked toward the stairs, probably to pack a bag and figure out his next con. But I wasn't done with him yet. "David," I called out. He stopped but didn't turn around. The documents Patricia and I have compiled have been copies to several attorneys, as well as the state medical board and the district attorney's office. If you're thinking about running, you should know that using someone's professional license as collateral without their knowledge is a felony, as is forging signatures on loan documents. Now he turned around, his face pale. "You're bluffing." I smiled. "Call my bluff." He stared at me for a long moment, then rushed upstairs. We could hear him moving around frantically, probably destroying what evidence he could find in the house. Jessica sank onto the couch, looking exhausted but relieved. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have seen this. I should have protected you." "Sweetheart, you couldn't protect me because you didn't even know you needed protection yourself. David is very good at what he does." "How long have you known?" I suspected something was wrong from the moment he showed up with those lawyers, but I didn't know how deep it went until Patricia started digging. We heard David's car screech out of the driveway an hour later. He took a suitcase and his laptop, but he left everything else behind. I suspected he wouldn't be back. The next few weeks were difficult but liberating. Jessica filed for divorce and cooperated fully with the district attorney's investigation into David's financial crimes. We discovered that his debts were even worse than we had initially thought. He owed money to bookies, casinos, and several credit card companies. The house was mortgaged far beyond its value, and Jessica's credit was ruined. But something wonderful happened as we worked through the wreckage of David's deception. Jessica and I found each other again. Without David's constant manipulation and control, my daughter began to remember who she was before she married him. She laughed more, spoke her mind, made decisions without seeking anyone's approval. "Mom," she said one evening as we sat in the living room of her house, which would soon be sold to pay David's debts, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For the last 10 years. For letting him turn me into someone I didn't recognize. For not being the daughter you deserved." I took her hand. "You were never the problem, sweetheart. You were just trying to make your marriage work. That's what good people do. I almost let him steal everything from you, but you didn't. When it mattered, you chose what was right." 3 months later, David was arrested in Las Vegas, trying to run another con on an elderly widow. The evidence Patricia and I had gathered ensured that he was prosecuted to the full extent of the law. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison for fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Jessica lost the house, but we found a small apartment together near the hospital where she worked. My cancer treatment was going better than expected, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about my prognosis. Most importantly, I had my daughter back. 1 year later, Jessica met a nurse named Michael, who treated her with the respect and kindness she deserved. Watching her tentatively learn to trust again was one of the most beautiful things I had ever witnessed. "Are you happy?" I asked her one day as we sat on the porch of our apartment, watching the sunset. She was quiet for a moment, considering the question I had asked her that night in David's kitchen when everything began to change. "I am," she said finally. "For the first time in years, I'm actually happy." "Good. That's all I ever wanted for you." "Mom?" "Yes? Thank you for saving me." I squeezed her hand. "Thank you for letting me." The phone call I made that day when I got back from the hospital wasn't to a lawyer or a financial advisor. It was to Patricia, a neighbor who became the key to exposing the truth and saving my daughter from a life of manipulation and control. Sometimes the people who try to take advantage of us underestimate the strength that comes from having nothing left to lose. David thought he was dealing with a dying old woman and her naive daughter. What he got was 2 women who refused to be victims. Jessica never got the inheritance David was trying to steal, because I decided to spend my remaining years giving her something much more valuable, her freedom and her self-respect. And in return, she gave me the greatest gift of all, the chance to be her mother again, not just her burden. That was the real inheritance we both received. Not money or property, but the love and respect we had lost and found again. And no one could ever take that away from us.